when I had that crash, I was hospitalized for 4 months. I was in the ICU for 7 weeks. It was up and down, life and death every day. Massive injuries. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but just to let you know that I did have 2 more near-death experiences in the hospital where I actually coded on the operation table. They called my time of death, told my parents I died, and to get ready for preparations for a funeral.
The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. And this is by Nelson Mandela. Welcome to another inspiring episode of Podcast with SHEILA, the podcast that is spreading positivity around the world by sharing inspiring life experiences. She is an award-winning health expert, an author, and co-author of many books. She has hosted many TV and radio shows to share her unique perspective on wellness, lifestyle, and nutrition. She has appeared on CNN, PBS, CBS, ABC, and the Food Channel. We have with us here today Nicole, who will be sharing with us her life experiences that led her to the woman she is today. Hello, Nicole, and welcome to Podcast with SHEILA.
Well, hello, SHEILA. Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative to be on your podcast today. I've been looking forward to this all weekend.
Great. It's a privilege to be hosting you today. I've read a brief of your story, and I'm excited for us to be sharing this story today. I believe it's going to be an impact to a lot of people, and it's going to be a great one on our podcast platform. So in brief, who is Nicole? Where does she come from? Just a basic background story before we set the ball rolling.
Okay, well, Nicole grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, so very much a Southern girl, and grew up in a very religious household. I was raised a Southern Baptist and Lutheran, so I was raised in a very conservative household. My father was a Marine, so we did what we were told. There was no talking back to parents. There was no becoming your own individual. My parents knew what was best for us, and we assumed they did, and we did everything we were supposed to. So I grew up being a people pleaser, and that's an identity that served me when I was a child, but it no longer serves me. And I think a lot of us fall into that trap, and we never get out of that identity, and it winds up causing us not to have our own identity because we're never going to be honest with ourselves when we're trying to please someone else. We're going to pretzel ourselves into different shapes to please others. And at the end of the day, SHEILA, the sad thing is we don't ever get what we want and need. So I grew up in the South, and then to please my father, I went off to the United States Air Force Academy, which is a military school. Now, you have to understand, I was not military inclined at all. I was a model. I worked on a team board in high school. I did junior achievement. I did racquetball, softball. I was not a varsity athlete. I had none of the prerequisites that you would think of as being military oriented, except for the fact that my dad was in the military and wanted one of his 4 siblings. So in order to get the attention, the respect, the admiration, the love, being seen, I applied because they had just allowed women, and to my shock, I got accepted. So here I go off after high school to this military institution, and I knew within the first 3 weeks that my soul and body were in the wrong place. But in our family, you're not allowed to quit anything. Failure is not an option. There's a lot of shame and humiliation and embarrassment that comes with quitting something, especially something this big and special. So even though I knew I was in the wrong place and I wanted to quit, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't make myself do it. So I suffered a lot of abuse that first year, and then going into my second year, I still couldn't quit. And then a car crash happened.
Nicole, share with us your career journey, or should I say your work journey, because as I read earlier on in your intro, I realized you're a TV person as well, but I'm beginning to realize that you were in the military. I don't know how both of them work, but share with us your work journey so that we understand the story proper.
So after going to the academy, I was in a car crash, so pronounced dead at the scene. And that is why I wrote the book, You Are Deathless. It took me 13 years to write the book. My near-death experience, my memory did not come back for another 19 years. So the only memory I had was bright white lights. And I went into the field of nutrition and became a dietitian and did a lot of TV shows around nutrition. And I did that because my parents, when I had that crash, I was hospitalized for 4 months. I was in the ICU for 7 weeks. It was up and down, life and death every day. Massive injuries. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but just to let you know that I did have 2 more near-death experiences in the hospital where I actually coded on the operation table. They called my time of death, told my parents I died, and to get ready for preparations for a funeral. Then my heart just started again after 2 minutes. Okay, so that was another NDE. And then I had another one where my lungs filled up with fluid and they could not get the fluid off of my lungs and I was literally suffocating. So I left my body again. So during that space...
Nicole, I appreciate the story you shared so far. I have so many questions to ask you, but how did the accident happen? Were you in the military when the accident happened, or had you come out of it?
No, I was still in the military. I was 19 years old. I was starting my 2nd year there, and I was getting a ride back to the academy with a older cadet who had been drinking, and I did not realize how drunk he was. And when my memory came back, he made a sexual pass at me, and I said no. And he crashed the vehicle. And it was a Corvette convertible, 1965. And for those that can see this, that's what the car looked like.
Oh, is that the crash?
That's the crash.
I'm going to at some point try and share the pictures on our TikTok page. Thank you very much, Akanksha, for joining us. One of our guests is on Instagram. Thank you very much for joining us. The crash is terrible. Your car crash accident was terrible. So did the driver crash the car because he was making a pass at you and you said no?
Yes. He got angry with me. And I never understood why I had relationship issues with men. I was always wanting to please them. And then when my memory came back, I realized that he was angry at me. And if I got a man angry, then my life could be threatened, was how my brain internalized that message. So I was always very careful not to get a man angry. Plus, I had lived with my dad's anger. So that is why the car was crashed. And he survived. He was conscious and had some injuries on his back. Was in the hospital a week and went back to the academy and graduated because his dad wore 3 stars. He was a 3-star general. And let me tell you, privilege has its ranks in the military. I mean, rank has its privileges in the military. The higher you up, you can get things done that normal people wouldn't be able to get done. So any other cadet would have been kicked out because the state of Colorado did charge him with vehicular assault, drunk driving, and he pleaded guilty and got off, basically. But that's not, that's how the crash happened. And I was pronounced dead at the scene. So it took the first responder coming back and uncovering me with the blanket, and he couldn't get any vitals on me. And the only thing that gave him a sign of life was doing a sternal knuckle press, which is designed to elicit pain in the body. And my right pupil, my eye flinched and the pupil dilated. Now, SHEILA, have you heard that phrase, your eyes are the window to your soul?
Yeah, I have.
At that moment, my soul had flown out of my body when I crashed, when I went up through the windshield, and I knew I was going to die when I fell back to earth. So an angel came and got me and took me up. But when the paramedic was working on me, that's when my soul came back into my body through my eye.
My God.
And my blood pressure all of a sudden was able to register at 60/0. Now, that's still horrible, but at least I was alive, because normal is 120/80, around that. So they immediately got me to the nearest hospital and just tried to it took them the entire night for that team of surgeons to stabilize me. And then it was just going to be up and down and up and down. And I had 6 major operations. I had my foot amputated. I had my pelvis broken, my wrist severed, bad road burn from skidding on the pavement. I had a 4th-degree laceration between my anal and sphincter, meaning I went butt up through the windshield, so I cut up all that area in between my the vagina area is the best way to say it. So I lost all feeling there. Had a huge skin graft I had to do there and on my ankle. So it was a lot of physical trauma. And then when the time came for me to be discharged, the doctor said, Nicole's going to need mental health help. And my mother looked at the doctor and said, Jesus and God are our psychologist and psychiatrist. And so I have to tell you, SHEILA, she was wrong. Jesus never came and sat down on the sofa with me and we had a session about the trauma that I went through. Okay? And as a result of that, I developed an eating disorder. And back then it was called compulsive overeating. That was how my body coped with the trauma. I hated myself, okay? And so that is why I went into nutrition. That's why I got my master's in nutrition, and I thought I could fix myself if I just knew enough about food. I didn't understand it was a mental illness. And so that is how it took me on the course of going into the career of wellness. And I looked at wellness, and I started in nutrition, but I then branched out into overall holistic wellness and lifestyle medicine, because it's not just what you're eating, it's also the physical part. It's the mental, it's the emotional, and it's the spiritual. And now I've come full circle on that wellness wheel, and I'm at the point now in my career where my vocation now is to tell people about the spiritual healing that has to happen at a soul level if you've been traumatized.
Wow, there's a lot of questions I want to ask you.
Yeah.
What was your dream like before the car accident? What were your hopes and aspirations for the future before the car accident?
You know, first of all, I think I wanted to get out of the military. My soul was not designed to learn how to kill people. In fact, I don't think any of our souls are designed to learn how to kill another person. Yeah. And that's why there is so much trauma with veterans and something called soul loss. So I was in the wrong place, and the only way that I could get out saving face was something this horrific to happen. So I am now a 100% disabled veteran of our U.S. Armed Forces. And before that, though, I wanted to be I loved the fashion industry. I loved putting on events. I loved, music. I took piano for years. You know, I was in ballet. I thought I could be a ballerina until I got to be 5'11", and when I would go on point, I would be taller than everybody else, including the guys. So that ended my ballet career. But I never really saw myself as being in the military. I wanted a family, like most people. I don't have children now. I didn't get married till I was 40 years old. So for those of you who have not found your soulmate, don't despair. There are people out there, and I found mine at age 40, but I had to go through a lot of the work myself. I have gone from a near-death experience to a spiritually transformative experience, and I had to really reconceptualize my entire life and to let go of belief systems that were limiting in my life and that were not true. And the only way for me to do this was to have, I think for me, such a massive experience and then go to the other side and see that all the fear that I was holding growing up about God was completely false. It was a lie. God has nothing to do with fear, and God is love. Period. End of sentence. And when you go back and you study the word fear, the Bible is translated from ancient text, and the term fear in this context was taken from the 1600s King James Version translation, which can mean awe and reverence. And all the near-death experiencers that I have talked to and I've read about have always shared that there was no fear, but profound awe and reverence. But somehow over the decades, fear has gotten changed into this meaning of being afraid. And when we live in fear, we lose our clarity. And in order to regain your clarity, you got to address your fears. And that's why my mission was given directly to me by Spirit when my memory returned from the near-death experience 20 years later, to not be afraid of death. While seemingly quite simple, it has taken me almost 4 decades to understand what that looks like for me. And now I understand that purpose, and I have shifted my work towards the spirituality that is essential to our wellness. And if you think about it, in almost every book written, death itself is cloaked in this veil of doom and gloom. We're in a death denial society. We don't think it's going to happen to us, and we don't prepare for it. And death has this cloud of depression and negativity around it throughout our culture and society. But my experience, along with hundreds of thousands of others, is 100% different. Death is absolute beauty, light, loving kindness, and this natural everlasting peace, filled with all kinds of colors on the other side. It is nothing to be afraid of. And I talk about the 10 positive lessons that come out of research done from near-death experience. And the first one is, we do not die. And that's the title of my book, You Are Deathless. And I want you to see under my credentials up there, SHEILA, I put BTDT. Do you know what that means?
No, I was going to ask you what that meant.
Been there, done that.
Oh, I know somebody who says that a lot, but she says, been there, done that, and I have a t-shirt for that. So oh my God, I saw, okay, great. Let me ask you, Nicole, I also read from your story summary that you were blamed for what happened to you. How did you deal with that?
That has taken me years, decades to resolve, because my father had 3 rules. He was very rule oriented. You know, there were the 10 commandments from the Bible, but my dad had his own 10 commandments, you know. Yeah. And when I went off to the Air Force Academy, he told me no smoking, no drinking, and no dating upperclassmen. Now, you have to understand, his dad was an alcoholic, so alcohol was forbidden in our household. So those were his 3 rules. Well, when the accident happened, we had been at a squadron function, and alcohol had been supplied by the Air Force, and I had 2 beers that day. For the first time in my life, I smoked a cigarette, and when this guy gave me a ride home, you know, my dad assumed I was going out with the upperclassmen instead of just getting a ride back. So he told me, because I broke his 3 rules, that I basically deserved what I got, and that I not only disappointed him, but my earthly father, but my heavenly father. So God condemned me, my father condemned me, my mother absolutely sides with my dad on everything. So she supported that, and to this day, and this August, it will be 40 years that crash happened, they still will not change their mind on that and forgive me and say, you had nothing to do with that. Even though the state of Colorado said you didn't, I wasn't to blame. I was a passenger, okay? This last May, talked to my roommate, who I had not talked to in 39 years. She quit the academy that Christmas after my car wreck, and I never heard from her until last May. And when I hooked up with her on a Zoom call, she said, Nicole, I'm so sorry, I caused the crash. And I said, what do you mean you caused it? She said, we had made a deal that we were going to drive back together, okay? And then when it ended, I liked a senior. He was drunk. He asked me to drive him back, and you asked if you could get in the car with us. And I said, no, I wanted to be alone with him because I really liked this guy, and we may make out or whatever. But there was one car left, and I said, but I don't want to go with him because I know he's been drinking. And she said, oh, Nicole, they've all been drinking. Go have some fun, and I'll see you back at the academy. Well, SHEILA, she never saw me back at the academy. And she didn't know that he had an agenda to have some more alcohol and stop and want to make out. And I didn't either. I was so naive. I'd never been on a date prior to going off to college. You know, I was so sheltered. And so she quit the academy. She was so haunted and filled with guilt. And I never knew this. My memory never came back of that. But when I told my father this is the type of person he is, I said, Dad, oh my gosh, Margaret told me that I knew he was drunk, and I tried not to, go back with him, and we had a plan. And he said, well, you still made a bad decision, and you should have walked back. Now that would have been 20 miles in the dark on a Sunday night back in 1983. No cell phones, no nothing, And I'm just like, so I have not talked to my dad since. I have no relationship with my parents. So it's sad, but they are very judgmental. They're religious addicts, and I've learned with religious addicts, you're never going to win.
Yeah,
you're just not going to win, and it's very sad. But they are toxic to me, and they're critical and they're judgmental, and I am not going to put myself in that energy anymore. And I have moved on, but it was the hardest thing to do, to let go of my parents, because I felt like I was abandoned, and they still to this day don't believe my concept of God that I have created based on what I experienced. They still believe that the Bible, that it is, you had the Word of God literally. And I just said, God is love, God is energy.
Exactly.
God is not a vending machine that you pray to, and that's not how God operates. And they don't believe that. They believe God is judgmental and punitive, and the wrath of God will come on you if you don't follow the rules. So it's been a very sad ending toward our relationship, that their beliefs in Christianity have gone so extreme that they would disown or not want to have anything to do with their children, or with me especially.
Wow, I have a lot of questions to ask you. I can see two of our guests, our former guests, two guests who've been on podcast with SHEILA. I can see them on Instagram, Akanksha and Amy. I never got that name right, so I'll just say Amy if I'm right. If you've heard us and you want to leave a question for the guest, I'll be happy to read it. But I have too many questions to ask, and I don't know which one comes first. I have a question about parenting. I have a question about the love of God, and I also have a question about shielded life of children, because I was brought up that way. I was shielded. And I've made many mistakes out of that, because when you're shielded, your parents make the decisions for you. So many things, they do it for you. Now, when you've grown up or you're of age and you're left to live life, it becomes really, really difficult. And it becomes very difficult to figure out the good ones from the bad ones, especially with friends. It's so difficult. And I've had to make mistakes, but I've had to learn very quickly as well. Because at a point in life, I was left alone. I had moved from my comfort zone, because I had moved from Ghana to join my husband here, and it was just me. So I didn't have my parents close by to be making those decisions for me. So I had to learn very quickly, and trust me, I made my first share of mistakes. And I know from the story you've just shared with us, Nicole, that it wasn't the best form of parenting for children.
I think children need to be exposed to all different types of things. And I lived in a bubble.
Yeah.
I went to a church that all believed the same way. I went to parochial schools until the 8th grade that all believed that same way. And all of our friends believed the same way. So I didn't have any exposure to anything different till I went to Colorado Springs. And all of a sudden, I was mixing with all kinds of different people. And I think what I regret the most is that my parents didn't feel that dating was beneficial. So I never, yet I'm going to a school with 4,000 guys. I was never taught about sex. I was never taught about the proper relationship between a man and a woman and what to expect on a date, or what the boundaries were on a date. When you say no, when you say yes, that your body is yours, and when you say something that they are supposed to respect it.
Yeah.
I was never given any kind of guidance on that at all. Birth control, nothing like that. And sexually abusive, mentally and physically abusive. I was called the C word, and I didn't even know what that was. And when I said, "Sir, may I ask a question?" "Sir, what does that mean?" They all laughed at me, but I honestly was that naive. So it wound up humiliating me, embarrassing me, like you, causing me to make mistakes, getting myself into situations that were really scary, that could have led to some really bad outcomes. But it's not fair to that individual, to that child, not to expose them to the reality of the world and just let them go and okay, throw them out there like you're swimming and hope that you're going to swim. You need to teach them. And part of that is saying this is what happens with a lot of relationships early on. Men typically want sex, and they may be a bit forceful about that, and so I really wish that piece had been explained to me and taught to me. The other one was at age 6 is when we typically individuate. We start becoming our own little people. And I never got to individuate. I got to be the person I was told I was going to be. You're going to go to this church. You're going to believe in this God. You're going to do what I tell you. You're not going to have friends because you really don't need friends. And our family is going to be, we're going to stick together. We'll be there for everybody. And that's all you really need is your family. And what I've learned is that belief system for me turned out to be not true.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I went against anything that they didn't believe, it was the realization that it was unconditional love. And I think the fear of abandonment is the worst thing that a child can experience. And you never want to be separated from your family. So I think kids need to be exposed to different cultures, to different foods. I was a dietitian. They would only eat what their parents ate. They wouldn't experience a new food unless they went to someone else's house. So it's all about experiencing different things and then being able to make your own choices.
Wow. I totally agree with you. Coming from my own experiences as a sheltered child, I totally agree with you with everything that you have shared. And I think that as parents we should learn to let the children be free, because every child is unique. They have their own ideologies, set of mind. I remember recently my children and we've started a warm water therapy. So every morning we drink warm water before we eat anything. And when I get the warm water ready, my son leaves his own for a long time. So I told him, what's the point leaving the water to cool? Then there is no point doing this therapy, because you need it warm to go in your body. So then I'll be standing on him, I'm saying drink it, I'm standing here, drink it. Then he just turned 9. He said, leave me alone, don't treat me like a baby, I don't like that. And for the first time I was shocked for him to say things like that. So then I realized that he's developing. He has a mind of his own. He has a way of doing things. I can only advise him. I cannot force him, but I have to explain to him the reason why he needs to take it warm, especially for him and all of that. So I think that these are some of the things parents we learn as we go along, and parents make mistakes most parents I know, they don't want to accept that they make mistakes, but parents do make mistakes, and that is where some of us get it wrong. Especially like recently, there's a way I pronounce my things because I was schooled in Ghana, so we have a particular accent and a way of saying things. And my daughter has a way of pronouncing things because she was born here in UK. And the British have a way of pronouncing things. So when I pronounced, it was one where I said, "I'll punch you." She laughed. And she said, "Why do you say that?" And she's just 6, going to be 7 this month. She said, "Don't say punch. It's not P-O, it's P-U." She's trying to correct me. And I'm thinking, my African self came. I'm thinking, why is a small girl trying to correct me? I'm too old for her to be able. But I had to sit down, and then, because she tried to justify it and tell me the reason why it's not P-O, it's P-U. And trying to use phonetics to tell me. So some of these things, as parents, I think we should let the ego side of a parent, we have to let it down, and sometimes listen to our children and be there for them in love. And especially that bit where you said, God is love. I think sometimes as Christians we take too many things on, and I think Christians have made being a Christian too difficult and very unattractive for most people. But looking at God is love. God doesn't force us. He gives us our free will to make our own decisions and all. But some of our parents, my dad used to be like that until some point he changed. They have to evolve, and then they have to be able to tune their minds to know that God is love. God doesn't force us to do things. That is why He's a forgiving God. When we make mistakes and we go to, He always forgives us. So the bit where they had told you that God forgives.
Well, and here's the beautiful thing, is one of the 10 lessons. We are not judged on the other side. We are not judged. Nobody is keeping a list. It's not Santa Claus up there keeping a list. When we go to the other side, we are not judged at all. And if we could not judge ourselves on the earthly plane, our human self, that would be one of the best things we could contribute to ourselves, to our families, to the world, is when that judgment comes in and you start shaming yourself for doing something bad, catch yourself and say, nope, I'm going to give myself compassion. I'm going to give myself empathy and be gentle with myself instead of what I call shoulding yourself. We need to take that word out of our vocabulary, because every time we say the word you should do this or I should be doing this, that is shame. And shame is the lowest vibration. And so take that word out of your vocabulary. Start being aware every time you use that word and pull it back and just say, wait a minute here. Why am I being so hard on myself? Because nobody is judging us as harshly as we judge ourselves. And the other beautiful thing is that love is all that matters and is the source of all that exists, period. And everything and every one of us is connected. And we have yet to get that message as a collective humanity. But we're all energy. The part that leaves us and continues on, that soul part, that is that vapor, that energy life force that keeps you alive. Because when you look in the coffin and you see that physical body, it doesn't really look like the person that you knew. I don't care how good the cosmetologist is, because your life force energy is gone, and that is what made you you. And that has moved on to the other side and lives forever.